You're proud to have worked hard and made sacrifices to serve your country. During your service, you were exposed to things that make your life more difficult years later. You reached out to the Department of Veterans Affairs for help, only to have your claim denied. Now what? Often, a VA denial letter is not the end, but the beginning of your journey. Stay with us as we discuss how to appeal claims denied by the VA. Thanks for tuning in to Veterans Voices. I'm your host, Elena Kim, and my co-host is Joshua Zebley. Today, we'll be talking about what to do if the Department of Veterans Affairs denies your claim. If you want to be a part of the conversation or have any questions, just use the QR code on your screen to join us in Zoom webinar. We would love for you to be a part of our show. And our guests today have helped a lot of veterans with claims that the VA denied. I want to welcome Veteran Service Representative Ben Yang, Swords to Plowshares Staff Attorney Karen Kaddish, and Manager at the VA Decision Review Operations Center, the DROC, Daniel Austin. Welcome. Let's start off, because we have a few veterans on our show today. Let's start off with Ben, and can you tell us a little bit about your service?
Sure. So I served in the U.S. Navy from 2002 to 2005 as aviation ordnance, stationed on the East Coast on a carrier, CVN-75, the USS Harry S. Truman.
Nice. Thank you so much for being here, Ben. And Daniel, it's my understanding that you're also a veteran. Can you tell us a bit about your service?
Yes, certainly. I served in the United States Army from 2003 to 2010. I was a commissioned officer in the Army during that time. And also during that time, I served 2 combat tours in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
Well, thanks so much for being on the show with us tonight. Let's take a look first at a VA denial letter and a decision narrative on the screen. So this is what it looks like. There's sort of 2 separate sections in this letter. This is what the veteran's going to get in the mail when they've been waiting for their claim. So I'm a veteran, I get this in the mail. Ben, what's the first thing that I should do when I open up my envelope?
Yeah. So when you do get the letter, the first thing you want to do is read the first 2 pages. The first 2 pages really explains what the VA decided, what they granted, what they denied, if they deferred a condition that you filed for. You really want to pay attention to that. The next part is you want to flip all the way towards the back, towards the decision narrative. Mm-hmm. The first part is going to explain, what evidence was reviewed. That's one thing you really want to pay attention to. And then it's going to list all the decisions, the grants, the denials, the deferrals. They're all going to be numbered. You're going to want to use that number to dig further into each paragraph, which will be numbered, talking in detail how they made their decision.
Nice. And Daniel, is there anything that the VA tells you in terms of if you got approved for a claim or if you got denied for a claim, what evidence might be in your favor? Anything they should pay attention to there?
Yes, absolutely. In the notification letter and in the decision, the VA will actually point out to the claimant what evidence that was filed with the claim or that is located in the evidence file that is favorable towards the claimant's claim. So we will identify that and point that out in the decision, giving the claimant an opportunity to review that and consult with either their veteran service representative or their attorney or their claims agent.
Karen, let's take that a step further. So you open the letter and you see that you had some claims denied. Immediately, you're thinking, I need to call the VA, I need to do this. What should you do right then?
So one thing that you might want to do, in addition to, as Ben said, taking a close look at that decision letter, is consider reaching out to your local county veteran service office. Every county has one, and they are there for every veteran in their county to be able to provide them help with this sort of thing. We at Swords to Plowshares work with veterans in San Francisco County and Alameda County on that sort of thing, so you may be able to see if there's another local nonprofit or veterans organization that is nearby that can help you decipher this denial if you're having a hard time figuring it out, or maybe see whether they can help you, actually appeal your claim.
So is there any reason to call the VA right then and say, hey, I was denied, what's going on? What are they going to tell you anything different than what's on the letter?
Generally not. There wouldn't be something that the VA hotline would be able to help you with. The only circumstance could be that if you think that they didn't send you the full decision, then you could call them just to ask them to mail out another copy of that decision.
If something was missing, yeah.
So there is 3 main reasons for denials, right? And I believe we're going to have a graphic on the screen. Ben, could you tell us a little bit about the 3 main reasons for denial?
Sure. The first one is going to be, no evidence in service. There's nothing in your service medical records or your personnel records identifying any complaints, exposures, illnesses, or anything like that. The second one is going to be no current clinical diagnosis. And then the third one is going to be there's no tangible evidence leading your current diagnosis back to that thing in service.
Yeah, so the VA decision letter is not going to say it that clearly, right? So let's talk about each of those in a little bit more detail. So no evidence of in-service incident. What's that gonna look like?
So one way that could show up is, let's say that you're, filing a claim for knee pain, but when you were in the service, you were 19, nothing bothered you. You never went to see the medic, because who goes to see the medic? And so you don't have in your service treatment record, on August 5th, Joe Schmo went and saw the medic and got ibuprofen and whatever for his knee. That's not in there. And so the VA, and they're looking through your file, may not see something to point to say, oh, this is where you got your knee injury. That might be evidence that you need to get in a different way to let the VA know that did happen, even though they can't see it off the bat in your service treatment records or your military personnel file.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off what Karen said is, we as veterans, we don't go in, make complaints. However, we'll go off of the knee pain. Now, let's just say your job in the military was a paratrooper. You're logging an extensive amount of jumps. A very common known disability would be knees, hips, backs, feet. That could be another strategic angle that Karen was just talking about.
Yeah, really
when
good
filing.
point.
Or even maybe you complain to your mom, your girlfriend, your friend that, hey, I busted my knee and it's been bothering me for weeks. Your friend could write a letter saying, hey, yes, I remember him hurting his knee and that it bothered him. And that would be another way to show VA that you actually did get that knee injury however many years back, even though you didn't go to the doctor for it.
Is that what's commonly referred to as a buddy statement?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That makes sense. So you said there's no evidence in your file. Does that evidence actually have to be you went to see the doc, or could it be at the end of your, you're processing out, you do your final physical, and you just check a box, knee pain, but you never really went and saw anybody? Would that count? Because there's no diagnosis, but would that be something that
they would
be
utilize?
count?
They would cover that in the narrative. Another, and Josh, you brought up a very important topic is 1 year post separation, the VA can consider that time presumptive, knowing that when serving active duty, we don't go to sick call.
So I just want to chime in that presumptive means that you don't have to prove that your knee pain today was caused by your injury that you remarked on your exit physical, that the VA just assumes it. Past that time, you have to show the VA that's that same knee injury acting up, 5-10 years later.
If I may just add to that, I noticed there was some conversation about medical records. So the VA, we will retrieve any claimant's entire military medical file to look for markers of the claimed event. For example, you mentioned knee pain identified on the separation exam. Yes, we're going to look at all that evidence and consider that evidence whenever we receive a claim, just sticking with the hypothetical about knee pain or a knee injury. So yes, we're going to look at all that and we're going to consider that. And from there, we'll determine whether additional evidence is necessary, including a medical exam or a medical opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of veterans do think I have to have all of these documents before I submit my claim, or maybe the VA did not have something. But what Daniel's saying is that the VA will take the steps to get your service records and review them. What about current diagnosis? So I get a claim that's denied because I don't have current diagnosis. Ben, what does that mean?
So a current clinical diagnosis basically means when filing a claim, I mean, you want to make sure that whatever happened to you in service, I mean, you have a diagnosis for that same condition or a condition that's progressed.
Yes.
That's a very common thing we see in denials.
I really want to emphasize this because a lot of folks will come into a county veteran service office and they know that something happened to them in service and they want to be compensated for that, but they haven't been to a VA hospital or they haven't been to a doctor recently to get that current diagnosis. And so they submit their claim, maybe they're online at va.gov, it gets denied, and there can be frustrations, right? Well, I know this happened to me, but they're missing that specific piece. So Daniel, what would you tell a veteran who is missing the current diagnosis and who's never been into a VA hospital?
So one, what I would encourage the individual to do is to seek out their medical provider, because a lot of times what we see is not necessarily a no current diagnosis. We'll see conflicting diagnoses. So in those instances, we have to rectify the conflict. So that's what we see a lot in the decision review operations centers. But typically, for example, for mental health conditions, those conditions tend to wax and wane. So sometimes you may go to your medical examination requested by the VA, and the provider determines there's no current diagnosis. That does happen. But there's also other evidence in the file that may conflict with that. So when we have that, we have to rectify that. So it was mentioned earlier in the broadcast. I believe it was Karen mentioned. The various opportunities out there for veterans or claimants in general to seek advice through service organizations. There's a lot of organizations across the country that provide free services. There are a lot of attorneys out there that provide pro bono services. So when those sorts of unique and complicated cases arise, I cannot emphasize enough to veterans or claimants to seek advice either through a service organization, a claims agent, or an attorney. They can point that veteran in the right direction. We do have avenues for veterans and claimants to seek guidance to the VA. We have the VA hotline. We also have public contact teams located in Veteran Benefits Administration regional offices located across the country. We also have support teams co-located in veteran medical centers. However, I would say probably in most cases, the most convenient avenue would be reaching out to a county veteran service officer or a VSO, American Legion, DAV, et cetera, or reaching out to a local attorney that is accredited through VA to practice in front of VA.
Yeah, really keyword, accredited by the VA, right? And tons of resources out there for you. And we'll show some of those at the end of the show, actually.
So the last main reason for denial is no medical nexus joining your service to the current diagnosis. Karen, can you help us with that?
Yeah, so to break that down, what that means is that in order for a current condition to be, identified by the VA as a service-connected disability, it needs to be more likely than not that condition was caused by something that happened in your military service. And that's something that often is a medical opinion. So when the VA orders a compensation and pension exam, Daniel referenced this earlier, that clinician who does your medical exam is going to issue a medical opinion on whether your current condition is, above a 50% chance that it's that same condition that you had when you were in the military or that it was caused by that condition. But that's one thing where also we can see that your private medical records can make a big difference. If you have a treating physician who you work with every week, every month on this issue, you can ask that physician to give their own medical opinion as a doctor who's been treating you for a long time, who might know you better, on whether your condition was caused by the events that happened when you were in the military. So that can lead to a situation like Daniel mentioned where there are conflicting medical opinions, but just so that people know, the VA gets your VA medical records, but if you get medical care outside of the VA, I would say 9 times out of the 10, even if the VA requests those medical records, they do not get it from that hospital because that hospital might not fulfill the request. So that's something as a veteran, that evidence that can be really important to provide on appeal to try and get that nexus determination or that current diagnosis determination by VA.
Definitely. So we hope that if you did see a private doctor, you submitted those records along with your original claim. Of course, if you did not, if you failed to, there is another avenue to approach that, and we'll talk about that after. But going back to the medical nexus, nexus keyword here is something connecting, right? Medical nexus means it can't necessarily come from your buddy in this case. It's got to be from a medical provider. Daniel, what is the VA's sort of best advice when you're looking for medical nexus? What would you tell a veteran who's been told this is what you're missing?
So just to echo what Karen had mentioned, a lot of times what will happen is a veteran or a claimant will have a private provider that they've been seeing for several years for a condition. And we may not have those records in VA. Yes, we do have a duty to assist to retrieve those records, but sometimes those records are not available from hospitals. That's the hypothetical that was used. A lot of times hospitals don't keep those records for a long period of time. So I would say is make sure that those records are in the possession of the VA if you are intending filing a claim for a disability that you've been receiving outside treatment for. Make sure those records are in front of the VA. I would also add, we do have a lot of times you can have a private examiner conduct an examination in conjunction with your claim, but you also want to make sure that that private examiner has any VA records that may be pertinent to the claim in front of them before they render any opinion. Because a lot of times, what will happen, VA will receive a claim, and yes, there may be a positive opinion providing a nexus to an event and service, but when you review the documents, the clinician may not have seen the entire record, or they may not have the appropriate credentials. So those are some things that pop up a lot of times when there's issues with nexus. But I'll say this, if the VA sees the disability in service, or, for example, sticking with the left knee pain issue and the paratrooper, we'll get the medical opinion to try and establish that nexus. That we'll do that through the VA. But if it comes back as a negative opinion, that's not the end of the story. There's other avenues to achieve service connection there. And Absolutely. One avenue would be seeking private medical advice or opinions, but they have to have the totality of the record.
We'll talk a little bit more about that when we come back. We're going to take a brief break first, and we'll continue our conversation about what to do if the VA denies your claim.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices. We're talking about what to do if the VA denies your claim. If you want to be part of the conversation or you have any questions, just use the QR code on your screen to join a Zoom webinar. We would love for you to be part of the show. So in the last segment, we talked about 3 reasons for denial. We want to move on to two appeals, 2 very common types of appeals. Carol, can you start with the first, and we have a slide coming up here soon. Can you start with the first one, Carol? We'll do it with supplemental review.
Sure. So one way to appeal your claim is through a supplemental claim. And so This claim is a way to ask the VA to reconsider your service connection application where you submit new and relevant evidence, and pardon me?
And it's also the fastest way.
It is generally a quicker way of getting a resolution
Typically,
on your appeal. You can either do it within 1 year of the denial, and that will save that effective date back for you, meaning that when your claim eventually does get granted, your compensation will go all the way back to that initial claim that you filed. But it's also a way to appeal a claim after many years have passed. I sometimes file supplemental claims for veterans who were denied in the 90s, and this is another way to reopen that claim as long as you have new and relevant evidence. That's the key part about a supplemental claim, is you have to have something new. That could be a personal statement, it could be new medical records, just anything new that goes to the question that the VA needs to decide.
And I love the point that you made, which is typically when the VA denies your claim, you've got a year to do something about that, right? You've got a year from when you get that letter back that we showed earlier. But what Karen is saying is that if you have new and relevant evidence, you don't have to worry about that clock. You can submit that evidence and the VA will go back and reconsider your claim. So again, we just want to emphasize to our veterans, a denial is only the beginning of your journey. You know, we're still moving on. What about a higher level review, Ben? Can you talk to us a little bit about what that means?
Sure. For a higher level review, the most common reasons why we would file or go that route is because there's a clear, unmistakable error on the part of the VA. A duty to assist error if an exam was never scheduled. But however, this is a lengthier process
than the supplemental review.
Correct.
Yes.
And we cannot submit new and relevant evidence in this route.
So it's just reviewed by a decision review officer. You don't get to submit any new evidence.
Correct.
One thing to note is that you can request an informal conference as part of the review for a higher level review. That does make it take, unfortunately, even longer. But what that is, it's just an informal phone call between either the veteran or the representative and the claims officer, the person who's going to make the decision on this claim. And it gives you a chance to just explain what you think the VA got wrong and what you think they should do instead. But you can't submit new factual evidence. You can just submit your reasoning and what you think was maybe incorrect about the decision the VA got to.
Right. Daniel, I know you have something to add to this, definitely. As a decision review officer, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So it's important, the higher level review lane claims are processed at three stations, one being Seattle, which I am the manager for, the others in St. Petersburg, Florida, and then there's one in the District of Columbia. So our goal in processing higher level review claims is to process them within 125 days. VA is well within that goal, well within that 125-day promise, and that was a promise that was provided by VA to Congress when the law was enacted that created the lanes, the Appeals Modernization Act, which was enacted in 2017. So that created that, and VA promised to complete these claims within 125 days. We're well within within that time frame. I will point out, Karen mentioned about I couldn't catch the whole statement, but about evidence. So the higher level review lane is a closed evidence lane. So that means you cannot introduce additional evidence, but you can argue about evidence that's of record. And a lot of times I would recommend, especially for the informal conference, that's the best avenue to do that. You can also submit written argument, but as long as the argument is covering evidence of record, that's fine. So that's the purpose of the informal conference. If I could circle back to the supplemental claim, yes, that is a lot quicker to submit and seek and get resolution on. Before we went to break, we were discussing a hypothetical about medical opinions and conflicting on medical opinions. Well, this is the supplemental claim lane is the perfect example where, say, you receive a negative opinion from a VA examiner, the VA renders a decision. Well, you say, oh, wait, well, I have this other private medical examiner that looked at the same facts and came to a different conclusion. Well, there's a supplemental claim. That's new evidence that wasn't considered at the time.
If you didn't submit it the first time around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good point.
So I just wanted to point that out.
And I know it's not exactly your lane, Daniel, but you said VA is turning around higher level review in 125 days. What is the number on average for the supplemental review lane? Do you have that?
Both are within 125 days. The
Both,
supplemental
okay.
claim, I want to say right now we're running around 100 days. Don't hold me to that number, but we're well within the 125-day target. And we've been consistently below that 125-day target since the enactment of the Appeals Modernization Act.
Excellent. And you mentioned with the higher level review, you can't submit new evidence, but it is a good avenue to be able to argue in an informal conference. Daniel, do you have to go to that informal conference on your own, or could you take a county veteran service officer with you or legal representation like Karen from Swords to Plowshares?
Yeah, actually, your representative, your attorney, your claims agent, your service officer can go by themselves. And yes, the veteran can go, but your representative can represent you on your behalf. So you don't actually have to attend. Your representative can attend and make those arguments for you.
Excellent, thanks.
So one thing I do want to point out is this is going back to the decision letter, how we were talking about the evidence that's listed as being reviewed. If in your denial letter you do notice that there was a piece of evidence that was not listed, this is the opportunity to go through the higher level review route to point out the error when making the decision.
In other words, I submitted this with my original claim packet, but when I got the letter back, it doesn't look like it was considered. It might have been overlooked. And so that's sort of an example of when you'd want to ask for a higher level review. Correct. It's not that you have additional evidence, it's that maybe that initial evidence that you submitted wasn't considered by the VA.
Correct.
Yeah. And how would you know that? What would be your kind of clue?
Well, you can look at the list of evidence that the VA should have considered. One thing that would let you know is if a compensation and pension exam that you went to, if a report from that exam isn't listed in the list of evidence, that would be, off the
red
bat,
flag, yeah.
something that the VA should have considered. Or if you know that you submitted private medical records to the VA that weren't considered, they're not in that list of evidence, that's another, typical point where you might be able to know that. Otherwise, in terms of getting, access to everything that's in your C file, which is the file that the VA benefits system uses, to look through all of your claims.
Which includes your
past
medical
claims,
records
your medical
and your
records.
military service records sort of
Right.
combined, yeah.
Exactly, and any claims records. So any previous decisions, any VA healthcare records that they've gotten. That would be something where I think most of the time having a VSO help you out would be useful. You can request a full copy of that if that's something that a veteran wants to do on their own to look through everything. But I would say that the two main pieces of evidence that I would be looking for would be any medical records that the VA should have, or a compensation and pension exam.
And I know Josh has a question, but I just want to jump in here because we've talked about VA medical records. When it comes to mental health claims, I think one of the often overlooked pieces of evidence is if you've ever been to a VA vet center, that is not automatically going to be released by the VA, right? It's sort of this sort of off the record kind of conversation that you have with a therapist at a VA vet center. And so you want to make sure that when you're submitting your claim, you give the VA approval to pull those records as if it were a private healthcare provider. I think that's something that kind of gets overlooked when doing a mental health claim. Josh?
That's okay. It's more of a statement than a question. So the first thing when you took your letter into your VSO or whoever helped you file the claim, that they would do was to look at the form and make sure that everything that you said was submitted, the VA recognized, right? That would be like a check and balance of one of the obvious things to do.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, when a claimant comes in or when a veteran comes in, they want to review and talk about why was my claim denied. So the first thing that we do is, if we have access to their claims folder, we'll review the narrative with them. Say this is the evidence that was considered. This is the basis of denial. Now we got to figure out what the appropriate lane, I guess, to use, either the supplemental or the higher level review.
That makes sense.
And one thing I do want to mention is that if you have a supplemental claim that gets denied, you can then do a higher level review of that denial. So, you have your claim denied, now you have your supplemental claim, let's say it also gets denied. You can do a higher level review at that point. What you cannot do is do a higher level review of a higher level review. So this is where it gets a little tricky, kind of like following the map of VA appeals. You can always do a supplemental claim. You can always do a higher level review of a claim decision, but you cannot do a higher level review of a previous higher level review.
So you're saying you can appeal an appeal that was denied if it's a supplemental review?
Yes.
Oh, that's definitely something I think that's kind of confusing, but also it just gives you 2 shots at appealing, or maybe more than 2. I don't know if you can do it for.
You can end up in a little bit of an infinite loop there sometimes.
Right.
Hopefully you don't need more than 2 shots at it.
Right.
If you're working with the right team member.
So
Danny?
if I may just add to that point, when a veteran or a claimant chooses opts into the supplemental claim lane, those claims are adjudicated by what we term rating veteran service representatives or veteran service representatives. Qualified personnel, but they're not as senior as the higher level reviewers. Those are your decision review officers. Those are more tenured decision makers and senior veteran service representatives, more senior service representatives. They're more trained to handle those complex issues. That's why those claims are out to the higher level review. So that's one of the reasons why you can't do a higher level review on top of a higher level review. It's not the only reason, it's one of the reasons why. But again, I can't emphasize this enough. If there's a question if any veterans out there or claimants out there have a question, seek guidance from a service organization or come to the VA and ask the question. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you and point you in the right direction as best we can.
Thank you, Daniel.
Because I know it can be confusing.
Yeah, and one thing I really want to add is on these denials, we already talked about the 3 reasons. Now, when doing a supplemental, a lot of veterans ask, so what type of new and relevant evidence should I be submitting? It's a quick answer. It's why was your claim denied? If there's nothing in service, unfortunately, you can't fabricate your service treatment record, so you need to focus on trying to obtain that favorable medical opinion. If you don't have a diagnosis, the new and relevant evidence would be get a diagnosis for the condition that you're claiming for. So I just want to make sure that is clear, because that is a very common question we get asked on a daily.
Yeah.
And also I think people might not realize how wide the framing is, that what the VA can consider. The VA can really consider almost anything. For clients, I've sometimes submitted newspaper articles showing that a certain event happened, statements from someone's ex-wife, from their mom, from a neighbor, really anything that you can find that gives that VA adjudicator, that claim decider, that piece of information. Because the VA is, at the end of the day, looking to find that information to grant your claim. So anything that you can get for them that they're not going to have access to is going to be helpful to getting your claim ultimately successfully through and granted by the VA.
Photos, dated letters, messages, things like that, definitely.
Yeah, really good.
This question is a little bit in the previous segment, but I have had circumstances where veterans told me, I hurt my knee. Here's again, it's hypothetical. I hurt my knee in service, and I would say, well, does it bother you now? And they say, no. I'm like, well, that's not exactly how it works. Did you guys come across that? Where it has to be, and like again, I know this was going back to the last segment, but I just thought of it. It has to still bother you.
Yeah, I mean, what the VA is really looking for is that chronic disabling condition, right? Somebody who, let's just say, twisted their ankle, rolled their ankle, injured their knee in service. Now, if there is no continuity of treatment, then the VA can consider that condition to be acute and transitory, meaning yes, we concede that you did injure yourself. However, since you don't need medical attention, it actually healed over time.
There is one other way that comes up. Yes, first of all, definitely veterans come in, they say, this happened to me, I broke my arm. And I say, well, how's your arm work today? They say, totally fine. I say, sorry, there is no compensation for that then. You did break your arm, no one's arguing with you about that, but you do need to have a current condition. The other thing that can come up, which veterans are surprised by, is that they can get service connected for a condition, but get rated at 0%, which means that the VA says you do have a condition, it's connected to your time in service, all three elements we've talked about are met, but the symptoms of that condition are not severe enough for you to get VA compensation for that. So that's something for veterans to keep an eye out. If they say, hey, my claim was granted, why am I not getting any monthly compensation? That could be a reason. And if you think that your symptoms are more severe, that would be a reason for a supplemental claim to try and get a ratings increase, is what it's called, to show the VA, hey, no, I do actually have more severe symptoms. Here's my medical records. Please send me for another medical exam. However, you're going to get those symptoms in front of VA to show that you should be getting compensation for that condition.
Daniel, you were talking to us about the difference between the folks at the VA who are doing supplemental reviews and higher level reviews, and sort of there's different levels of training there and experience and seniority. Can you give us a sense in terms of volume? What percentage of the claims that the VA's reviewing are going to be supplemental reviews versus higher level reviews?
So I will say historically, as far as higher level reviews go, of our receipts across V, we've received hundreds of thousands of claims. I would say anywhere between 17 to 20% will fall into that higher level review lane. Mm-hmm. The supplemental lane is very popular because it's a lot quicker than a higher level review lane. So that's going to receive the majority of that, 80% of those claims. And those supplemental claims are processed through all the VA service centers across the country. Those are not centralized in the decision review operation centers, in Seattle, St. Pete, and DC. So supplemental claim lane by far is going to receive the largest volume, and then the higher level review lane.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
I think we've definitely cleared up the difference between a supplemental and a higher level review, right? New and relevant evidence for supplemental claim, or you have a year, but you can still do it after a year. And that would be basically like a same claim, but a new claim without new and relevant evidence, or no?
So if you do it past that 1 year mark, you still do need new and relevant evidence to have a supplemental claim. The difference is that your effective date is going to be the date that you filed the supplemental claim, meaning that when that claim does eventually get granted, your back pay date is going to go back to when you filed the supplemental claim.
Got it.
Versus a supplemental claim that's filed within 1 year of a denial, that back pay date is going to be the date of the initial claim you filed.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, but don't go away. When we return, we'll conclude our conversation.
Honestly, I'm not really sure why I'm calling. It's just...
I'm having nightmares.
My husband and I, we're just fighting a lot.
I can't get any sleep.
Things just keep getting worse, and it's starting to feel like I can't do this by myself anymore.
We could use some help figuring things out.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you called. Why don't you tell me more about what's going on? There's no wrong reason to reach out for crisis support. Whatever you're going through, the Veterans Crisis Line is here to help. Visit veteranscrisisline.net to learn more.
Welcome back to Veterans Voices. We're talking about what to do if the VA denies your claim. If you want to be a part of the conversation or have any questions, just use the QR code on your screen to join us in Zoom webinar. We would love for you to be a part of the show. And so Daniel's dropped off. We're now having a conversation about BVA. And the reason Daniel's not with us anymore is because Daniel works for the VA, and folks kind of conflate the BVA, the Board of Veterans Appeals, a lot with the VA. So let's unpack this and talk about the difference. So the Board of Veterans Appeals is when your claim is placed in the hands of a law judge. Ben, can you take us through some of those options for when you are at the BVA?
Yeah, no. So when you've gone through the supplemental review, the higher level review route, and you're still not happy with the decision, you have 1 year to file a notice of disagreement, which is a claim that goes in front of the veteran law judge. Now, there's 3 different avenues. There's a direct review, a direct appeal, supplemental appeal, and then a hearing appeal. The first is the direct appeal.
Yeah, we're going to go through these one by one. So let's
Yeah.
talk about the direct appeal.
So for the direct appeal, it's basically the law judge must review all evidence on hand. You cannot submit new evidence. There is no hearing with the veteran law judge. The direct appeal has the quickest turnaround time. As of right now, it looks like it takes about a year.
Okay. So you can't submit any new evidence, but you are getting your claim reviewed by a judge at the Board of Veterans Appeals, not a VA employee, right?
Correct.
Different than the higher level review that Daniel was talking about.
Correct.
Earlier.
The veteran law judge really just, combs through all the evidence, everything that's submitted to make sure that, the decision that was made is correct.
So why, Karen, would someone choose this route instead of that higher level review route? It sounds like in both cases you're getting a new look, but you don't get to submit any new evidence.
So typically administrative law judges, the type of judges that are going through the BVA cases, they are, even one higher level, more robust than a higher level review, should have more experience. And sometimes a reason to do that if there's a challenging issue that may not be addressed every day at the VA. If it's something that's unusual, you're trying to get someone to go out on a little bit of a limb, that might be a time when the BVA would be more appropriate. Or if you think there's just kind of like some block with the VA, that's just something is not quite adding up right, that could be a time when the BVA would give you, a better shot than an HLR.
So there's a supplemental appeal, right? That's the second layer of it. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so another way to get in front of the BVA is a way that you can submit new evidence, and it still doesn't have a hearing with the judge. The veteran doesn't introduce testimony, but you can submit new documentary evidence, meaning new papers. If you have new medical records, often representatives such as myself might submit a whole brief in support of a veteran's claim, listing argument with evidence, potentially new evidence that I think the BVA should consider. You have 90 days to submit that new evidence, and then it kind of goes into the BVA world, and they take, however long it's going to take for them to review it and get you a decision back. It's definitely more than a year, I would say, in my experience. Almost always, we're looking at maybe even 2 or 3 years. One thing for veterans to note is to keep their address updated with the VA during this time period, because the VA is going to mail you out a copy of your decision, and many veterans move within the time frame that the BVA is looking at their case. So the best way to get a copy of that decision is to keep your address updated. It is also one of the situations in which I would advise a veteran to call the VA. Yeah. To ask if a decision has been made on their BVA appeal. That is something the VA can tell you if you call the VA hotline for benefits information.
Very good point.
So you can submit new evidence, but going back to the direct appeal, can you, like in the supplemental review, I believe it was, or the higher level review, where you can argue on behalf of the evidence that was already submitted, but you can't submit new evidence?
Yeah, that's exactly right. For a direct review, you can put argument in. I, as an advocate, might try and explain the evidence that's in there in the most favorable light for my client, for a veteran to show the BVA rather, really why we're right, why this veteran should get their benefits. But I can't submit new evidence. I can't submit their medical records from last week.
Okay, got it.
So you're choosing the BVA route, the Board of Veterans Appeals route, and let's say you want to submit new evidence. This is that third lane, right? It's called a hearing appeal. Can you talk to us a little bit about the hearing appeal lane at the Board of Veterans Appeals? Yeah,
so you can submit new and relevant evidence in the supplemental appeal, but for the hearing appeal, this is the most lengthy process. Right now, it's averaging about 4 to 5 years. Why? Because not only are you asking the veteran law judge to review the evidence, you're also trying to schedule a hearing in front of the law judge.
So you can give testimony potentially.
Correct, and also have representation.
Yeah.
One thing for veterans to note, because I have had clients who want to have a hearing or who I advise them, I tell them, I think you really need a hearing in this case, and they may be nervous to go into, in their mind, go into a courtroom, talk in front of a judge. One thing for veterans to know is that this is not what we would call an adversarial hearing. This is not, Law and Order where they have someone questioning you, trying to break you, get you to say something wrong.
Right.
It's supposed to be a cooperative, collaborative environment. It's not in a courtroom. Most of these hearings that I've done are over a video conference, actually. And really the judge is trying to understand what you want them to know, what information you think it's important for them to have. It's very unusual for a judge to, to push back on the veteran really hard or put them in an uncomfortable position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that sort of empathy side of it too, yeah. So we've got a question coming in from one of our viewers, Rita. And here it is. I appealed my denied claim to the Board of Veterans Appeals and elected to have a hearing. Is someone going to be there to represent me in that hearing, or am I on my own now? What should veterans know in this situation?
Yeah, so for representation, it's really going to be their power of attorney. So for us working in the Veteran Service Office, we are accredited with these different nonprofit organizations like the California Department of Veterans Affairs, American Legion, VFW. Now, these entities, these organizations, they have representatives who will be contacting the veteran before their hearing.
Okay, so I want to back all the way up because in civilian world, power of attorney sort of has a different connotation. So when we say power of attorney here, Karen, what are we talking about?
Right, when we're talking about power of attorney, we're not talking about someone who can make healthcare decisions for you or something like that. The power of attorney with VA is someone who you've asked to help you with your claim, who they've submitted, a form to the VA that you've signed saying, hey, I'm helping, this veteran with their claim. Please send me all the information about their claim, any decisions that come out. I can submit paperwork on behalf of this veteran. And if you don't have someone who's doing that, then you do not have someone who's automatically going to show up at the BVA for you. This will be someone who you know about, or you should know about, hopefully. If you do not know who your power of attorney is, please go see your County Veteran Service Office or call the VA to find out. And it's also important to check in with that person while the BVA appeal is happening, because that person may not think that they're still representing you. If your denial was a long time ago and you filed this BVA appeal on your own, well, I guess it would have been within 1 year that you filed this BVA appeal, but it's just important to check in, make sure that you know what that person's scope of work is for you, what they're expecting to do for you, and ideally, though, you would have someone who's helping you with your claim appear with you at the BVA hearing, but it is not required.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to echo what Karen's saying is check in, right? So we're talking about the Board of Veterans Appeals here. This is the avenue of approach that is the lengthiest. So we're not talking about just months. We could be talking about years if you choose this avenue of appeal. And so if you have someone representing you, whether it be someone from your county veteran service office or an attorney, or someone from any other accredited veteran service organization, right? Disabled American Veterans, Vietnam Veterans of America, American Legion, those are kind of when we say veteran service organization, they're working with other veterans beyond you, right? They'll typically have a caseload, and depending on where you are, that caseload might be extensive. So put a note in your calendar to check in every few months if you've selected this avenue, the BVA. Ben, did you have something?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you're going to these hearings, you have 3 options, really. I mean, one, you can have one in person in DC. You can ask to have a hearing virtually from a VA facility or from your very own home or wherever your representative will be with you at. So it's really, really important, as Karen was saying, is to know who you're being represented by.
Yes, excellent, thank you.
We have another question from Mo from Orlinda. The Board of Veterans Appeals sent me a letter indicating that my appeal had been remanded. What do I need to do next? And what does remanded mean? I think it's more.
That's the first question.
So remanded means that it got kicked back down. It got kicked back to the VA to make a new decision. And so sometimes it's going to be remanded and the Board of Veterans Appeals will have told the VA to do something specific. And that will be in the decision letter that you get from the Board of Veterans Appeals. Maybe they're remanding it, they're kicking it back down for the VA to order you another compensation and pension exam or get a specific type of medical opinion. Maybe they're kicking it back down because they think that the VA needs to consider a certain piece of evidence differently. So you are going to want to look at that decision letter to see whether there's something that you as a veteran need to do. I would say the most common next steps for a veteran after a remand would be a new compensation and pension exam. That would be the most likely scenario in which a veteran is now going to need to be on the lookout for the VA to be in touch with them to set something up. I don't know if there's something else that you
Yeah, I mean, these decision letters are quite lengthy, a lot lengthier than a regular decision letter. Why? Because the veteran law judge is really clearly spelling everything out, the evidence considered, what the VA needs to do next, a direct play-by-play. Now, when it gets remanded or sent back down to the VA for reconsideration, Karen's right. The most common next step is rescheduling an exam. But once it gets remanded, something I do want to point out is now there's a chance of playing volleyball, meaning the VA may be able to make a decision. If not, they'll send it up to the Board of Veterans Appeals to then make a decision. So that's why going the BVA route is lengthy.
Yeah. So the Board of Veterans Appeals has looked at all of your evidence and they've said, you know what, we're going to send this back to the VA because something's missing that maybe the VA should have handled. It sounds like it's most commonly a compensation and pension examination. So the VA will get notice to schedule you for that exam, but you also need to be on the lookout or maybe listening on your telephone for a phone call from the VA or one of their contractors to schedule you because you don't want to miss that exam, right?
Correct.
If that's what the BVA is saying that you need in terms of evidence.
So can you appeal a denial from the BVA?
Yes. So
I know there's a next step
Yeah.
that we don't want to go too far into.
You can always appeal. So if the BVA denies you, there are a couple of different things you can do. One thing that you can do is you can put in a motion for reconsideration by the BVA. I'm not remembering the exact time limit on that, but it's pretty quick. It's like in the range of 60 or 90 days. I don't remember the exact number of days, so look that up. I will say that's it's unusual for that to be successful. The other thing that you can do is you can appeal a BVA denial to the Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. That has a 120-day deadline to file that appeal. And that gets you into a federal court completely outside of the VA world. And that's a much more rigorous process that I would say most veterans would not be doing on their own. The last thing that you can do is you can file a supplemental claim, which is
All the way back to the beginning.
if you have new and relevant evidence
There you go.
to the BVA denial, you can file that supplemental claim. If you file it within 1 year, you still preserve your effective date. And if it's been 20 years, you can still file that supplemental claim and try and get a new decision. One place that has been really relevant recently is if there's a change in the law. So people may have heard about the PACT Act. So someone maybe was exposed to toxins when they were deployed and they got denied all the way up to the Board of Veterans Appeals. That might be a new situation now that there's a new law in place. And so the new and relevant evidence would be the new law.
Right.
That they could say, hey, now I have this condition that Congress has found is connected to my service in Iraq, my service in, the Gulf War, whatever it is, please reconsider.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yeah, I think that's something that you think you're denied and then something changes and all of a sudden you wouldn't have been denied in this case, so you can go back and do it. So we should, take this from the beginning, right? This is entire process and it looks kind of linear, but then there's kind of like where are you going? You file the claim. It's denied or granted, right? Some could be granted, some can be denied if you're submitting multiple claims. Once you get that letter, read it, Go visit whoever helped you file the claim. If you did it on your own, you shouldn't have. But go visit someone that can help you that experience and gets paid to do this. They will figure out why you got denied. The VA will tell you these are the multiple reasons. We know that 3 reasons for a denial are potentially no evidence of in-service incident, no current diagnosis, and no medical nexus joining. I hope everyone understands those. That will help you not be denied, right? We don't want to go through this process. Hopefully in your time of filing claims, you never even have to hear about an appeal because you never have to do it. Then we have a supplemental review, a higher level review. After that, you might need to go to the BVA, correct? And this is all taken, years, right? So the point of this whole show is not to teach you how to navigate the appeal process, but to teach you not how to even be in it in the first place. So if you're looking at the 3 reasons of denial and to seek a accredited representative to help you with your claim, that is the point of the show that I want to get across. But we are very lucky to have folks like you two and like Daniel earlier that can help with this from the beginning and to the end. So I want to make sure we got that in there before we wrapped up the show. Do you guys have anything else to add about any of this process that can help veterans, not even hear the word appeal or denied?
Well, I mean, you literally hit the nail on the head. It's really, per the VA, what does it take to establish service connection, right? It's something that happened in service and, a current clinical diagnosis, and to make sure that there's tangible evidence. To avoid a denial, we know what we're looking for. So, I mean, the claims process, it does sound difficult when we discuss it this way, but if we really know what the VA is looking for, I mean, that's really the evidence that we got to provide.
Karen, last thoughts in about 15 seconds?
Yeah, I do want to say though that denials are common. So anyone who gets denied, it can be really disheartening. It can make you want to give up. You could say, hey, that took all my energy, all my heart to get this claim in the first place, especially if you have a claim maybe for something that's pretty difficult for you to talk about, and the idea of going to another medical exam sounds like the worst thing you could imagine.
Yes.
I just want to acknowledge that can be really hard, but hopefully, you're not alone. It's common, you didn't do anything wrong, and there are lots of ways that a veteran or someone who's working with a veteran can try and get a better outcome for that veteran, at the end of the day.
I could not have said that better myself. And for all of our viewers, we brought these folks on because they're our experts. So seek them out or someone like them to help you with this process. As Karen said, you're not alone. That's our discussion. I want to thank all of our guests today. Please remember that a VA denial is not the end of your claim, and there are many ways to appeal denials and get the benefits that you earned and deserved. We hope you found our conversation educational. We leave you with some resources if you want to dig a little deeper. For help with filing any VA claim, a county veteran service officer is a great place to start. Find one near you at nacvso.org. Find your service record at National Archives. Just go to archives.gov and click on Veterans Service Records. Swords to Plowshares helps veterans in many ways, including legal help with VA claims. Find them at swords-to-plowshares.org. Veterans Voices is brought to you in part by contributions from the Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans near you. American Legion Post 246, honoring the tradition of the American Legion in Danville. If you would like to help sponsor Veterans Voices, you can donate to Veterans Voices, care of Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation. Get in touch with them at diabloveterans.org. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week, or check your cable provider's schedule for rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra Costa, so be sure to subscribe. Click on the link or scan the QR code to find us on all our social media channels. Our next show will air on Wednesday, September 11th at noon. We'll be discussing September 11th, 2001. To all our veterans and their families, thank you for serving. To all of you who tuned in tonight, thanks for watching and have a great evening.